Imagine this. You wake up to absolute chaos. The kind of chaos you've only seen in dystopian movies. It's a cold, quiet morning, but something isn't right. Your phone won't stop buzzing. News alerts flood your screen. You turn on the TV, and there it is. The president has completely lost it. At first, the footage seems fake, like a bad deepfake, but then you see it with your own eyes. The president is live on national television, and nothing he says makes any sense. He laughs about looming wars like it's a game. He issues bizarre random orders. His top officials? Fired. His new Secretary of Defense? His dog. Outside, chaos erupts. Protests flood the streets. Twitter spirals into panic. Journalists scramble for answers, and one question looms over everything. How do we get him out of the White House? There is one possible solution. A little-known passage in the US Constitution, designed for moments just like this. The 25th Amendment. But here's the problem. While the Constitution promises a simple fix, the reality is far more dangerous. What if the system fails? What if no one has the guts to act? What if the US descends into chaos? This is the moment of truth. Can the 25th Amendment actually remove a president? Or is it just a fairy tale we all want to believe in? To understand the 25th Amendment, we need to rewind the clock to one of the darkest days in American history. November 22nd, 1963. President John F. Kennedy was assassinated while riding in a motorcade in Dallas, Texas. The shocking tragedy plunged the nation into mourning, but it also revealed a disturbing gap in the Constitution. At that moment, Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson was sworn in as president, but what if Johnson had also been shot too? What if there had been no one prepared to lead? There was no clear constitutional mechanism to deal with such a scenario. The US government was forced to confront a critical question. What happens if the president is alive, but unable to lead? Who decides? How do we ensure continuity of power in the highest office of the land without plunging the country into chaos? It wasn't just hypothetical. Presidents before Kennedy had faced health crises that raised alarm bells. Woodrow Wilson had a stroke in 1919, leaving him incapacitated for the final year and a half of his presidency. His wife, Edith Wilson, eventually took over many of his duties, even though she was never elected. Dwight D. Eisenhower suffered a heart attack during his presidency too. Still, no one ever came up with a clear plan. JFK's assassination illuminated the problem most clearly. Finally, Congress acted. By 1967, the 25th Amendment was ratified to fill the void. The whole point was to design a system that could deal with replacing a president. It got 4 parts. Section 1. This is the simplest part. If the president dies or resigns, the vice president automatically becomes the president. We've seen this in action a few times throughout history, from Gerald Ford taking over after Nixon's resignation to Lyndon Johnson stepping in after Kennedy's assassination. Section 2. If the vice presidency becomes vacant, the president can nominate a replacement. That nominee then needs to be approved by a majority in both the House of Representatives and the Senate. For example, when Gerald Ford became president, he nominated Nelson Rockefeller as his vice president under Section 2. Section 3. This section allows the president to temporarily transfer power voluntarily. It's used in situations like medical procedures where the president is under anesthesia. For instance, President George W. Bush invoked Section 3 twice when undergoing colonoscopies, temporarily transferring power to Vice President Dick Cheney. Apparently, when Trump got his colonoscopy, he didn't want to give up power, so he did it without anesthesia. Kinda weird. Section 4. Now, here's where things get interesting and controversial. Section 4 allows for the forced removal of a sitting president if they are deemed unable to discharge the powers and duties of their office. It's intended for extreme scenarios like a president falling into a coma, experiencing a debilitating medical crisis, or even exhibiting signs of severe mental instability. But as straightforward as Section 4 sounds on paper, it's far from simple. In fact, it's never been used. Why? Well, because implementing it is a politically charged, almost impossible task. Section 4 of the 25th Amendment is the constitutional equivalent of a glass box labeled "break in case of emergency." It's meant to be a last resort when the country faces a dire situation where the president is no longer fit to lead, but refuses to step down voluntarily. Here's how it works. The vice president and cabinet take the first step. The vice president, along with a majority of the cabinet, must agree that the president is unfit to lead. They then submit a written declaration to Congress stating that the president cannot discharge their duties. The vice president becomes acting president. Once the declaration is submitted, the vice president immediately assumes the role of acting president. The president can contest the declaration. If the president disagrees, they can send their own written declaration to Congress, asserting that they are fit to lead. This triggers a constitutional standoff. Congress makes the final decision. If the president contests the claim, Congress has 21 days to decide. To remove the president permanently, a 2/3 majority vote in both the House and Senate is required. On the surface, it should be pretty straightforward, but the political and personal stakes make it incredibly difficult to execute. Imagine being the vice president. You've likely spent 2 years working closely with the president, aligning your political career with theirs. Turning against them, especially accusing them of being unfit for office, is not just a constitutional decision, it's a deeply personal and political gamble. And what about the cabinet? These are individuals handpicked by the president, people whose loyalty often lies with the leader who appointed them. Convincing a majority of them to declare the president unfit is no small feat. Then there's Congress. Reaching a 2/3 majority vote in both chambers is a monumental task, especially in today's hyperpolarized political climate. Why is the 25th Amendment necessary? Despite these challenges, the 25th Amendment was and remains crucial. It's a safety net, a safeguard from moments of genuine crisis. While it hasn't been fully tested, it provides a legal framework for addressing some of the most complex issues a democracy can face. But it also raises unsettling questions. Could the amendment ever actually work as intended? Or is it more of a symbolic gesture, a reassurance to the public that there's a plan, even if that plan might never be executed? As we move forward, we'll dive deeper into these questions, because while the 25th Amendment was designed to handle crises, the real test, whether it could ever be implemented in the politically charged reality of American governance. And trust me, the stakes only get higher from here. Alright, this is the turning point of the story, where the tension between the ideal and the reality of the 25th Amendment reaches its boiling point. On paper, Section 4 promises to be a constitutional safeguard, a safety net to catch the country in moments of profound crisis. But in practice, Section 4 has one fatal flaw. It's politically impractical. Let's break it down step by step. Imagine a scenario where the president has become so unfit to lead that the nation is at risk. The amendment seems to offer a clear path forward. The vice president and a majority of the cabinet declare the president unfit, and the system works as designed. Right? Well, not exactly. The reality is far more complex and infinitely messier. 1. Loyalty. The vice president is the linchpin of the entire process. Without their agreement, Section 4 is dead on arrival. But here's the catch. The vice president's political career is almost always intertwined with the president's. They've likely campaigned together and built their political legacies as a team. Now imagine the vice president being asked to turn against the very person who put them on the national stage. They not only risk destroying their political figure, but also face accusations of betrayal. The stakes couldn't be higher. Even in cases where the president's behavior might genuinely warrant removal, the vice president would face immense pressure to stay loyal. After all, politics isn't just about what's right or wrong. It's about perception, alliances, and survival. And loyalty to the president isn't just a matter of principle. It's often a matter of political self-preservation. 2. Consensus, the cabinet's catch-22. If the vice president does agree to move forward, the next hurdle is rallying a majority of the cabinet. And here's where things get even trickier. The cabinet is handpicked by the president. These are the president's most trusted advisors, people chosen because of their loyalty and alignment with the president's vision. To invoke Section 4, these same individuals would have to publicly declare that the president is unfit to lead. It's not just a professional decision, it's personal. Think about the stakes. Turning against the president could mean the end of their careers, the destruction of their reputations, and an unrelenting wave of public scrutiny. What's more, cabinet members might not even agree on what constitutes unfitness. Is it a medical condition? Erratic behavior? Questionable decisions? The Constitution provides no clear definition, leaving the door wide open for interpretation and for disagreement. 3. Congress, the nearly impossible vote. Even if the vice president and a majority of the cabinet manage to clear these first 2 hurdles, the final decision rests with Congress. If the president contests the declaration, and they almost certainly would, Congress has just 21 days to act. And here's the real kicker. To permanently remove the president, a 2/3 majority in both the House and Senate is required. That's not just a high bar, it's a political Everest. Think about how rare it is to achieve a 2/3 majority on anything in today's hyperpolarized political climate. Congress struggles to pass routine legislation, let alone something as monumental as removing a sitting president. Achieving that kind of consensus would require an extraordinary level of bipartisan cooperation, something that feels almost impossible in the current political landscape. 4. Backlash, the cost of invoking Section 4. But even if all the pieces fall into place, the vice president agrees, the cabinet acts, and Congress votes to remove the president, there's still one enormous risk. Backlash. Invoking Section 4 would be an unprecedented event, and the fallout would be seismic. Supporters of the president could take to the streets in protest, believing the process to be a coup rather than a constitutional safeguard. Civil unrest, nationwide protests, and even violence could follow. This is a huge problem in today's America, where individual politicians are lionized above their parties or agendas. But that's a problem for another video. The very mechanism designed to protect democracy could end up destabilizing it further. Instead of bringing clarity, it could plunge the country into deeper chaos. And for that reason alone, the people in power often choose to avoid Section 4, even when the circumstances seem to demand it. The paradox of Section 4. Here's the tragic irony. Section 4 was designed to address moments of crisis, but it's precisely during those moments, when the stakes are highest and the political climate is most charged, that it becomes almost impossible to use. In the rare cases when Section 4 might have been considered, political considerations always outweighed constitutional ones. Whether it was loyalty, fear of backlash, or the impossibility of achieving consensus, the amendment's promise has remained untested, stuck in the realm of theory rather than practice. And this raises an unsettling question. If Section 4 can't be used in the moments it was designed for, what does that say about its effectiveness? Is it truly a safeguard for democracy, or is it a constitutional fantasy? An ideal that crumbles under the weight of political reality? As we move forward, we'll explore these questions even further, diving into hypothetical scenarios where Section 4 might work, and whether the system could rise to the occasion when it's needed most. Because in a divided nation, the line between protection and chaos is razor thin, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Act 3. This is where theory collides with reality, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Let's explore the scenarios that might force America to actually use Section 4 and ask whether it could save the nation or end it. A medical emergency. Imagine this. The president suffers a sudden stroke and falls into a coma. They're physically incapable of resigning, and the nation is paralyzed without leadership. This seems like the perfect moment for Section 4 to step in. The vice president and cabinet would declare the president unfit, and power would transfer seamlessly, or so we'd like to believe. But even in a situation as clear-cut as a coma, there's room for doubt. Who makes the call that the president won't recover? What happens if the president's allies push back, arguing that removing them is premature or unnecessary? Even a medical crisis could become a political battlefield in today's climate. Mental instability. Now picture this. It's not difficult after the last 9 years. A sitting president begins making wildly erratic decisions. They ignore advisors, escalate unnecessary conflicts, and display concerning psychological behavior that threatens national security. This isn't just hypothetical. During Donald Trump's presidency, questions about invoking the 25th Amendment arose after January 6th Capitol riot. Members of his own administration reportedly discussed whether Trump's actions, his refusal to accept the election results, his incendiary rhetoric, constituted unfitness for office. Yet, even in those moments, Section 4 wasn't invoked. Why? Loyalty, fear of backlash, and the sheer difficulty of building consensus prevented any action. If Section 4 couldn't be used, then what would it take? An authoritarian threat. Here's the most chilling possibility. A president loses re-election but refuses to leave office. Instead, they exploit their powers to undermine democratic institutions, fire key officials, and mobilize supporters to challenge the transfer of power. It's not hard to imagine, because we've come close. Think back to January 2021, when Trump's refusal to concede led to one of the sketchiest moments in modern American history. While the system held that time, what if it didn't? What if a future president is more ruthless, more calculating? Could Section 4 be the last line of defense against an authoritarian slide? Or would the very process of invoking it inflame tensions, sparking unrest, and tearing the nation apart? Act 4. Even if Section 4 were invoked in any of these scenarios, the battle wouldn't end there. It might just begin. The process relies on 3 fragile pillars: trust in institutions, bipartisan cooperation, and public support. And let's be honest, these pillars are cracking under the weight of today's hyperpolarized politics. Think about it. In a nation where a good chunk of the population already views the other side as an existential threat, would invoking Section 4 unite people or deepen the divide? Would supporters of the president see it as a constitutional necessity or as a political coup? The aftermath could be catastrophic. Imagine protests erupting nationwide, accusations of tyranny flying from both sides, and a government unable to govern effectively amidst the chaos. The very act of trying to stabilize a nation could destabilize it further. Here's the paradox at the heart of Section 4. It's designed to be a tool of last resort, a constitutional safeguard for moments of crisis, but the very conditions that might require its use, polarization, distrust, and political extremism, make its success almost impossible. Take Trump's presidency as a case study. If Section 4 wasn't used after the events of January 6th, when the Capitol was under siege and questions of fitness were on the table, could we ever expect it to be used? Or is it destined to remain a theoretical idea, a safeguard that only exists on paper? And yet, the stakes couldn't be higher. The next crisis could push America to its breaking point, whether it's a medical emergency, mental instability, or a threat to democracy itself. Section 4 represents a choice to act or to let history take its course. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Invoking Section 4 might not save democracy. It could rip the country apart. The nation would be forced to reckon with protests, backlash, and perhaps even violence. The decision to use it, or not to use it, could shape the future of the United States for generations. So, where does this leave us? Section 4 of the 25th Amendment is a fascinating paradox. On paper, it's a powerful tool to protect democracy. In practice, it's a near impossible gamble, a Hail Mary pass in the game of politics. Its greatest strength, the need for broad consensus, is also its fatal flaw in a nation as divided as ours. The question we must ask ourselves is this: can our political system ever rise to the occasion? Or will Section 4 remain a constitutional fantasy, a safeguard that crumbles under the weight of political reality? And finally, what do you think? Is Section 4 a vital tool for democracy's survival? Or is it just an unworkable idea? Let us know what you think in the comments down below, because the conversation about America's future is one that we all need to be part of. And I'll catch you next time.